Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to SFF180. Thomas here, your host as always. Thank you for joining me. Okay, so yesterday you got my list of 2022 science fiction titles. And today, for the first time ever, I'm adding a video for anticipated horror. Now, of course, SF and fantasy have always been my main jam here at the channel, but recently I've been getting more involved in reading horror, and not just in my 12 Days of Halloween series, which I hope to bring back in 2022. In fact, all this year, I read way more horror than fantasy, meaning I'm overdue to catch up on my fantasy reading. There's always too many books, too little time. The first thing I noticed while researching this video is that it was harder to pull together than the other two genres. It's only been very recently that mainstream Big Five publishers have come back to publishing horror in a big way. Barnes & Noble has only had their horror section back in stores for not much more than a year, after getting rid of it back around the turn of the century or something. What this means is that the most interesting and exciting work in horror fiction has been coming from indie publishers, small presses, micro presses, and even self-publishers. And these aren't exactly the kinds of publishers who announce their upcoming slate of books 6, 8, 9 months in advance, right? And online lists are not much help either. Most of them combine horror with thrillers, which I have no interest in. And you'll also find a lot of upcoming horror books lists that just include any fantasy novels they can find that might be just a tiny bit spooky. Well, attention, your sexy vampire boyfriend romance books are not horror novels. I said what I said. Still, with a little digging and judicious effort, I have been able to come up with 29 titles next year that hopefully will cause you to sleep with the lights on. Now remember, as always, all release dates are tentative and subject to change without notice. Beginning in January, Christy DeMeester returns on the 18th with Such a Pretty Smile, a feminist fright fest told across dual past and present timelines, in which a mother and her teenage daughter try to confront a murderous force targeting young women who just won't conform to expectations. A couple of releases on January 25th, starting with Christy Nogle's Beulah from Cemetery Gates Media, a ghost story set in a small Idaho town where 3 young sisters encounter malevolent ghosts while helping their mother renovate an old schoolhouse. That same day, veteran author Christopher Golden brings us Road of Bones, a story for those of us who like our horror served cold, about a documentary producer who travels up Siberia's infamous Kolyma Highway near the Arctic Circle, only to make some shocking and unexpected discoveries in an abandoned town. My next 3 picks all come from Tor Nightfire, an imprint that, if I must be brutally honest, has so far not been living up to its initial promise. I was deeply disappointed in some of its most heavily hyped releases this year, but 2022 gives the impression Nightfire might be about to find its groove, so I'm remaining optimistic. On February 8th, Nightfire releases Echo, the long-awaited new novel by Dutch author Thomas Oldehoyevelt, a thrilling descent into madness and obsession as one man confronts nature and something even more ancient and evil answers back. It's been 6 years since Hex, and so I think fans of that book are ready. Then on February 22nd, we get a book that looks to be the blackest of black comedies, and an utter blast. Gretchen Felker Martin's Manhunt is the chronicle of 3 trans characters in a post-collapse New England, fighting off feral men and TERFs and billionaire bunker brats in what I hope will be an absolutely gleeful gorefest. I don't know, maybe we could all take up a pool and mail some copies to J.K. Rowling. And on March 1st, Nightfire releases Sundial, the next novel by Katrina Ward, in which tensions rise between a mother and daughter when the mother begins worrying about her daughter's peculiar habits, and the daughter in turn feels frightened by her mother's inexplicable scrutiny. So you probably all know by now that my reaction towards last novel, The Last House on Needless Street, was not kind. But I've never been one of those one strike and you're out readers. Some of my favorite authors in all the world have written books I despise. And I wouldn't have kept up a 20-year reviewing career if I gave up easily. So I'm ready to give Sundial a shot. Back to indie horror on March 15th with Matthew Lyon's A Black and Endless Sky, in which two siblings on a road trip through the desert Southwest find their journey taking an ominous turn when the sister begins exhibiting strange changes in her behavior following an accident at an abandoned industrial site. Now, if there's one thing I like just as much as polar horror, it's desert horror, and the desert Southwest happens to be my personal favorite part of the country, so this is pushing several of my buttons. March 22nd sees the release of All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes, and the fact that we're getting another polar horror novel so soon has me absolutely losing my mind with joy. This one is set in Antarctica after the First World War, where a stowaway among a stranded expedition team encounters an unknown supernatural force trying to lure them one by one to their frozen doom. Also on March 22nd, a new anthology from Nightfire, Dark Stars, features 12 original novelettes by authors like Stephen Graham Jones, Carolyn Kepnes, Gemma Files, Alma Katsu, Josh Mallerman, and John Langan. And it's all done as a tribute to the classic 80s anthology Dark Forces, edited by the OG legend Ramsey Campbell, who also has a story here. On April 26th, Alma Katsu returns with another historical horror, The Fervor. Set within the Japanese internment camps of World War II America, the story is based on Japanese yokai tales as a mysterious affliction of possible supernatural origin begins to spread through the camps. A couple of titles on May 10th, starting with K.C. Jones's Black Tide from Nightfire. Described as Cujo meets A Quiet Place, it all begins when a man and woman share an impromptu hookup at the beach, only to find themselves stranded and fighting for their lives when a meteor shower results in widespread destruction and unspeakable horrors begin to close in around them. The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas is a debut supernatural tale of suspense set in the aftermath of the Mexican War for Independence, and an obvious pick for fans of Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, about a remote house, a sinister haunting, and the woman pulled into their clutches. On May 17th, Nightfire releases the deeply creepy-looking Just Like Mother by Anne Hiltzel. It's the story of a woman who grew up raised in a cult, who reconnects with her cousin years later. Her cousin has become fabulously successful from a secretive startup, but it soon becomes apparent there's something very sinister under the surface. This one gives off vibes very similar to the movie The Invitation. On June 7th, Tiffany Muret's Little Bird comes to us from Black Spot Books, in which a woman struggling emotionally in the wake of a string of personal and family traumas discovers she has yet another problem to worry about: a bizarre growth of thorny vines in the backyard, a nosy neighbor, and a chatty skeleton. Also on June 7th, if there is one name in horror that is always reliable, no, it's not Stephen King, it's Ellen Datlow, the field's most prolific and respected editor and anthologist. And her newest anthology from Nightfire, Screams from the Dark, is a monster-themed affair with contributions from Stephen Graham Jones, Caitlin R. Kiernan, Gemma Files, Richard Kadrey, Joe Lansdale, Joyce Carol Oates, and many more. July 12th is a big day for new horror. In fact, all of July is super busy with new horror. Grady Hendrix returns with his usual mix of humor and horror with How to Sell a Haunted House. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's just a placeholder cover. Anyway, this book takes on the haunted house premise in a hilarious and terrifying new novel that explores the way your past and your family can haunt you like nothing else. Also on July 12th, a woman going through divorce takes her young daughter to visit her Alzheimer's-stricken mother in a coastal village, and finds that her mother believes a malevolent force from the ocean is watching and reaching out to the young girl the way it has to generations of women in their family. In Katrina Monroe's They Drown Our Daughters, from Poison Pen Press. And finally, on the 12th, T. Kingfisher is back with a new short novel from Nightfire, What Moves the Dead, a gripping and atmospheric retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's classic, The Fall of the House of Usher. On July 19th, Ronald Malfi follows up his excellent Come With Me with Black Mouth, perfect for fans of Stephen King's It. A group of friends return to their hometown to confront a nightmare they first stumbled on as teenagers in a mesmerizing odyssey of terror. Also on July 19th, C.A. Fletcher, author of A Boy and His Dog at the End of the World, returns with Dead Water, a tale of horror set in a remote island community off the North Atlantic coast, where ferry service has failed and contact with the mainland has been lost, and the fabric of the once tight-knit island is unnervingly torn apart. And finally on the 19th, Nat Cassidy's Mary, An Awakening of Terror, from Nightfire, is the story of a middle-aged woman living a quiet, unremarkable life who begins to realize her mind is channeling the thoughts and echoes of a notorious serial killer. And then the killings begin again. Next, Grand Central Publishing releases Old Country by Matt Query and Harrison Query, a horror thriller about a former Marine and his wife who buy a perfectly secluded ranch only to discover it's haunted by a malevolent spirit. The write-up says it is, quote, based on the Reddit sensation, so I don't know if that means it started life as a popular creepypasta on our no sleep or what, but the novel is coming our way July 26th. Next, this one just goes without saying, Don't Fear the Reaper from Saga Press on August the 2nd. It's by Stephen Graham Jones. It's the sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw. That's all I need to say. Also from Saga on August 23rd, Gwendolyn Kist, an author who has more than proved her mettle in the small press trenches, moves up to the majors with Reluctant Immortals, a historical horror novel that looks at two men of classic literature, Dracula and Mr. Rochester from Jane Eyre, and the two women who survived them, Bertha and Lucy, who are now undead immortals in 1967 LA, when Dracula and Rochester make a shocking return in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. On September 13th, another indie superstar, Gemma Amor, releases Full Immersion from Angry Robot. A traumatized woman with amnesia finds her own dead body and sets out to uncover the truth of her demise in a race against time, sanity, crumbling realities, and the ever-present threat of a mysterious predator known only as the Silhouette. And on November 1st, Nightfire releases Pinata, described as A Head Full of Ghosts meets Hereditary, a terrifying possession tale by Mexico City writer and artist Leopoldo Gaut, in which a woman brings her daughters to Mexico as she oversees the renovation of an ancient cathedral into a boutique hotel. But once they return home to New York City, one of the daughters begins acting strangely. Finally, I have 3 titles that do not yet have exact release dates, but all of them are, to the best of my knowledge, definitely slated for 2022. The first of these is Desert Creatures by Kay Chronister, who is best known for her story collection Thin Places. It's described as a feminist horror western set in a desolate future, sort of like if The Road had been written by Flannery O'Connor. All about a girl on an uncanny pilgrimage to the holy city of Las Vegas. This will be coming from Erewhon Press in the fall. And last, but by no means least, the brilliant Haley Piper is blessing us with not one, but 2 22 releases, and possibly even a third, but I'm only including 2 to be on the safe side. Off Limits Press will be releasing Your Mind is a Terrible Thing, while No Gods for Drowning will be out from Paulus Books, probably in the fall. Now, the thing about Haley that makes her so cool is she does not like to repeat herself. So, the first one is a sci-fi horror novella, while the second is kind of a horror detective story in which a serial killer is sacrificing victims to summon old gods, but he might be summoning the wrong one. And there you have it! All the shuddery horror thrills you could hope for in 2022, and this is only scratching the surface. Let me know in the comments which horror releases you're most excited for next year, and remember to be back tomorrow when I wrap up my 2022 lists with most anticipated fantasy. So as always, if you enjoyed watching, please hit that like button, Share the video far and wide with all of your SFF and horror reading friends, and above all, please subscribe. If you have not done so, that's how the channel grows. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army get little perks like early access to some of my videos, depending on how early or late I finish editing them. I'm not always great about it, and I'm so sorry for that, but I really do appreciate all of you for your added support, my Patreons. I use the Patreon money to pay Matt Olson, my very gifted channel artist, for all of the beautiful thumbnails and other artwork that he does for me. So your help there is greatly appreciated. I also want to thank all the rest of you guys for being the very best viewers in all of BookTube, and until I see all of you next time, please stay safe, stay healthy, and spooky reading.